The date is May 14th, 2007. The Suns are about to win Game 4 of the Western Conference semifinals. As Steve Nash dribbles up the court, Robert Horry would deliver a sudden hip check, sending Nash crashing into the scores table. Though he wasn't injured on this play, a chain reaction will be set in motion, one that would ultimately cost Nash his best shot at a championship. To understand, we must first go back a couple hours. In the first quarter, the Suns would come out of the gates on fire, and after a relatively quiet Game 3, Steve Nash would be aggressive from the opening tip.
Nash from downtown.
Well, you knew he was going to get off to a quick start here tonight.
Phoenix would jump out to an early 8-point lead behind Nash's energy and shot making.
Nash to the fadeaway, and he is feeling it here in the early going.
Coming into this series, with the MVP not yet announced, Nash is still the reigning back-to-back MVP. 2 MVPs in his first 2 seasons as a Sun. In fact, the reason for Nash even being in Phoenix is in its own way a miracle. You see, before Nash's Suns tenure, Nash was part of a rising Big Three in Dallas, alongside Michael Finley and Dirk Nowitzki. They were a perennial 50-win team that was a real threat in the playoffs year in, year out. However, in the 2004 offseason, after Nash's disappointing playoff run, Dallas would develop major concerns about Nash's future, in particular if his body could hold up long term.
Our doctors were telling us he was going to have issues, and he was in his early 30s, right?
The Suns would offer Nash a 6-year, $63 million deal. When Nash took the offer back to Mark Cuban, Cuban declined to match it.
Yeah, I still got the pad where I took the notes where Steve called me to give me that last chance, right? Yeah, it was a mistake, the biggest mistake I ever made with the Mavs.
Nash would join a 29-53 Suns team and in his first season, lead them to an NBA best record of 62-20. With the starting lineup of Nash, Amari Stoudemire, Sean Marion, Quentin Richardson, and Joe Johnson, the Suns looked to be a perennial contender for years to come. In that year's playoffs, the Suns would defeat Dallas to advance to the Western Conference Finals against the Spurs.
3 for the tie. Good! Steve Nash again!
Unfortunately, Joe Johnson would suffer a fractured orbital bone, causing him to miss the first 2 games of the series. Nonetheless, the Suns would be outmatched. The Spurs will win in 5. This would be the second time in 3 years that Nash would be eliminated by the Spurs. Just 2 seasons prior, the Mavericks would also be eliminated by San Antonio in 6 games. A caveat though must be mentioned, as Dirk Nowitzki would suffer an injury in Game 3, missing the final 3 games. Even without Dirk, the Nash-led Mavs were about to force a Game 7 before an avalanche from Steve Kerr in the 4th quarter would eliminate the Mavericks.
Steve Kerr played all 2 minutes before this game, and then out to Kerr one more time to take the lead, and then Kerr another. He was 4 of 4 from deep, a 31-8 run to take the lead.
Ironically, Kerr is now on the call for our game today, and the inevitable is seemingly unfolding again. After a blazing start, the Suns will fall into the trap of playing the Spurs style of basketball.
Well, Mark, I think this is the critical point in this entire series right now. I mean, everything's going San Antonio's way. Can Phoenix get the game back in its favor? Can they get running? Can they make some stops? Can they go on a little Suns spurt here? Because if not, this is demoralizing, because this is the best game San Antonio has played. It's their style, and if they can close this thing out and go up 3-1, it's going to be awfully tough for Steve Nash and the Suns to get back in it.
But every time San Antonio looked ready to break it open, Phoenix had an answer.
Save and banked it home. Here's Nash for 3. Steve Nash fires the 3.
And this is just true of who the Suns were, a resilient team. Following the Western Conference Finals disappointment, Phoenix's front office would make the controversial decision to break up their young core, trading away both Joe Johnson and Quentin Richardson, and getting back Boris Diaw and Kurt Thomas. The motivation? Mostly financial. A move to avoid the luxury tax. And unfortunately, this wouldn't be the last time that Suns owner Robert Sarver would prioritize cost-cutting over contention. Then, just before the 05-06 season tipped off, Amari Stoudemire would injure his knee and miss the entire season. Vegas would set the Suns' win-loss at 43.5 for the season. But Nash wasn't done. In his 2nd straight MVP season, he would lead the Suns to 54 wins and the 2nd seed in the West. In the playoffs, while much has been made of Kobe Bryant's game winner in Game 4, what often gets overlooked is what came next. The the Suns stormed back from a 3-1 series deficit to eliminate the Lakers. They pushed all the way back to the Western Conference Finals, this time falling to the Mavericks in 6. For the second straight season, the Suns have overachieved expectations, and for a second straight season, they weren't able to break through. But now in 2007, things are looking a bit different. Amari is now back from his surgery and is looking better than ever, earning himself a first-team All-NBA award, while Nash is arguably having his greatest season yet, coming in second in MVP voting. The Suns would have another 60-win season, at one point even winning 33 of 35 games, both losses going down to the buzzer.
Nowitzki guarded by Marion for the win. What a hit.
In the playoffs, the historical number 1 seeded Dallas Mavericks were stunned by the 8th seeded Warriors in the first round, one of the biggest upsets in NBA history. As a result, the Suns and Spurs became the best remaining teams left in the playoffs, with the Suns having home court advantage. This would be their best chance to finally break through. No more injuries, no more what-ifs. Game 1 will go all the way down to the wire, with Steve Nash coming up big in the clutch.
That's a three. Steve Nash from downtown.
However, because of a cut suffered earlier on his nose, the refs would force Nash to sub out. The Suns training staff was unable to stop the bleeding, and ultimately, the refs would refuse to allow Nash to re-enter the game for the final minute.
Well, his shorts have blood on them, and the last time Nash was on the court, he was dripping blood all over it. That's why he's been sitting on the sideline, as you mentioned, guys.
The Suns would end up losing Game 1. In Game 2, the Suns would bounce back and blow out the Spurs to tie the series, and in Game 3, the Suns would lose. However, this would in itself become one of the most infamous games ever because of the officiating. In fact, one of the first viral NBA videos I remember ever watching on YouTube was about the absurdity of the calls in this game.
About getting hit here. Look, that's a foul. Robert Horry hit him on the arm.
How bad did it get? Well, Bill Simmons will write post-game.
Congratulations to Greg Willard, Tim Donahue, and Eddie F. Rush for giving us the most atrociously officiated game in the playoffs so far, Game 3. Most of the calls favored the Spurs, but I don't even think the refs were biased. They were so incompetent, there was no rhyme or reason to anything that was happening.
Keep in mind that this is also before any of the Donahue allegations came to light. And if you're wondering what Donahue might argue in defense of himself, this is what he said in 2019.
Tommy Nunes, who was the group supervisor at that time for that series, didn't like Sarver, who was the owner of the Suns at that time, and was always pointing out in the tape sessions of things to call against Phoenix and things not to concentrate on against San Antonio. And I think it put San Antonio at an advantage.
Now down 2-1, the Suns will be entering Game 4 in a must-win situation. Steve Nash will also be seeking his first playoff win in San Antonio since May 27, 2003. But before we get to that, a quick word from today's sponsor. By the way, if you're enjoying the infamous series thus far, please remember to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. It would really mean the world, and I would love to see how many of you guys are actually following this series. Now, back to the video. Now in Game 4, the Suns are in a must-win situation. Lose the game, you're down 3-1. You win, you get a best-of-3 series with 2 at home. Despite a fourth quarter double-digit deficit, the Suns will fight back.
Here's Marion.
Momentum is shifting, and everybody in the building can feel it.
Pulls it up and scores. Steve Nash.
This is, I think, a bit of a watershed moment for this club. Can they break through? There's always a moment, a defining moment for teams that are contenders, where they try to break through against a championship caliber team.
With under a minute left, Steve Nash would deliver 2 daggers, but in typical Nash fashion, he would do it through assisting his teammates.
Now let it hold Nash behind the back. Stoudemire scores, going right at Duncan.
With 32 seconds left, all the Suns needed was one more stop.
Ginobili going at Bell. Ginobili. And it's tipped to the corner, played by Barbosa. And here is Nash being chased, and they had him all look out. As Horry sent Nash flying, and Bell goes at Horry. Nash got up. He wants to go at Horry.
Phoenix maybe coming of age as a franchise, fighting through a game that they really didn't have going in their favor. Here's Nash, a forearm shiver from Robert Horry, and if that's not a flagrant foul, I don't know what is.
While the entire world was trying to make sense of why Robert Horry would hip check Steve Nash, a more serious question quietly emerged for Phoenix.
Question is, did anybody leave the bench off this melee?
Well, you see Stoudemire coming into the play, and the coaches sending he and Boris Diaw back to that bench area. The question is, were they on the court or not?
I was going to check on Steve. I'm walking toward him to see if he's all right. We got to have our two-time MVP on the court.
At the time, I was the senior vice president in charge of basketball operations for the NBA. And Boris Diaw and Amari Stoudemire violated the rule that required that players during an altercation, which at that time was between Horry and Steve Nash, during an altercation, you could not leave the vicinity of your own bench. Boris Diaw and Amari Stoudemire did, which required an automatic one-game suspension.
And you talk about a young mistake, and if indeed Stoudemire was on the floor, which looks like the league will have to look at very closely, and that could cost Phoenix Amari Stoudemire in Game 5.
After the game, the NBA would decide to suspend Amari Stoudemire and Boris Diaw for Game 5, while Robert Horry would be suspended for 2 games. Despite being undermanned in Game 5, the Suns would give it their all, leading by as many as 16. They would eventually run out of gas. They lost the game, and ultimately the series. In 2010, the Suns would get a taste of revenge, sweeping the Spurs in the second round. But even then, they would fall short of making the finals. For the rest of Steve Nash's career, he would never break through. When speaking about this series now, he carries no bitterness, accepting of the result, grateful for the journey. But for those of us who remember, who felt it, we can't help but wonder what could have been. Let us savor this moment a bit longer, for when it felt, the Suns have finally broken through.
And Marv, I think what makes this such an amazing win for Phoenix is that the game was played at San Antonio's pace.
Here's Barbosa. It counts at the foul.
I mean, you never really got the sense that the Suns were playing their style.
Spurs, Nash, yes.
But this is a breakthrough win for the Suns.
Stoudemire.
This could be a defining moment if they could get over this hump.
Oh, Nash behind the back. Stoudemire scores, going right at Duncan.
Well, I think we got a long way to go. Maybe after all said and done, we can look back at this, but I think there's so many moments left to go, and let alone in Game 5 and the rest of the series, and then the playoffs beyond if we're lucky enough to get by them. So we got a long way to go.